Hello everyone. In today's video, get ready for an emotional story filled with incredible revelations. We will meet Callum Grayson, a 22-year-old young man who went through two near-death experiences that completely changed his life. During one of these experiences, he encountered his deceased grandmother, a woman he had never met in life, but who revealed family secrets that will leave you speechless. So, before we begin, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and turn on the notification bell to receive all updates. Now, prepare yourself for an intense journey full of mysteries. Hello, my name is Callum Grayson, and I'm here to share with you two experiences that completely changed the way I view life and death. I'm 22 years old and I live in Brighton Hills, a typical small American town where everyone knows each other. I grew up here and went through experiences that challenged everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what may exist beyond it. Before I dive into the details of what happened, I want to make it clear that I'm not here to convince anyone. I know many people may doubt or try to explain what I experienced in different ways, and that's okay. I just ask that you listen to my story with an open mind. What I'm about to tell is real, at least to me, and it completely changed my perspective on existence. My near-death experiences occurred at two distinct moments in my life. The first when I was only 5 years old, and the second at 17. Both situations took me beyond the limits of life as we know it, and each left deep marks on me. In the next few minutes, I will share with you, in detail, what happened during these two crucial moments of my life. I will talk about what I saw, felt, and experienced when I was clinically dead for a few minutes. I will also explain how these experiences transformed my worldview, my relationships, and the way I live. I ask you to join me on this journey with an open heart. Even if you don't believe in life after death or out-of-body experiences, I hope my story will at least make you reflect on the mystery of existence and the possibilities that may exist beyond what our eyes can see. Get ready for a story that defies logic and reason, but one that is deeply human and transformative. This is the story of my journey beyond life. Two experiences that redefined everything I believed to be real and possible. My first near-death experience happened when I was only 5 years old. It was a regular afternoon in Brighton Hills. I was playing in the backyard like any child does. My mom had sent me outside after I broke my older sister's dollhouse. I distinctly remember trying to open the door to get back inside when I felt a sharp pain in my hand. A black wasp had stung me. What happened next is something I will never forget. Even though I was so young at the time, I am allergic to wasps, and the reaction was quick and frightening. My body started to swell, my throat closed up, and within minutes I could no longer breathe. My dad wasn't home, and my mom, panicking, saw and ran to our neighbor and godfather, who called the police. On the way to the hospital, everything went dark. In the emergency room, I have vague memories of doctors around me, frantically trying to bring me back, but it was no use. My heart stopped, and I was declared dead. That's when something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, I found myself floating above my own body. It was as if I were an invisible observer, watching the entire scene from above. I saw the doctors working on me, heard their urgent voices, but I didn't feel fear. On the contrary, I was overcome by an indescribable sense of peace. It was like I was surfing through a dark gray tornado, without sound, without gravity, just an unparalleled tranquility. There was no pain, no fear, only a feeling of lightness and freedom I had never experienced before. As I floated in this state, I was taken to a dark place dotted with small white lights. The scenery was surreal, yet somehow familiar. That's when I saw something that's been etched into my memory. Children playing in that ethereal space. Among those children, a blonde girl caught my attention. She wore a cream dress with blue flowers and had a radiant smile. She turned to me and, with a friendly gesture, invited me to play. I felt an immense urge to join her, to go down and be part of that joyful group. But something held me back. It was a gentle yet firm force that kept me floating, preventing me from descending. This force was incredibly comforting, like a warm embrace from someone you love and trust completely. As I contemplated this scene, something else caught my attention. I saw a puppy playing joyfully among the children. In that moment, I was filled with immense joy, a pure and simple happiness that only a child can feel. It was in this moment of pure joy that I felt a force pulling me back. It was as if someone had grabbed my hand and pulled me with force, taking me away from that wonderful place. In the blink of an eye, the scene disappeared, and I found myself back in my body. I woke up suddenly, with a sheet covering my body. The doctors, who thought I was dead, were in shock. I remember hearing exclamations of surprise and seeing astonished faces around me. That first experience, even though I was so young, remained etched in my memory with astonishing clarity. The feeling of peace, the children playing, the blonde girl, and the puppy, all those details stayed vivid in my mind over the years. At the time, I tried to tell my parents and the doctors what I had seen, but they attributed it to a scared child's imagination. Over time, I learned not to talk about it too much. But I never forgot. That experience planted in me the seed of a deeper understanding of life and death, an understanding that would only solidify years later with my second near-death experience. That first journey beyond life left me with many questions. Who were those children? Why couldn't I join them? And that feeling of peace and unconditional love? Where did it come from? These questions stayed with me, silent but ever present, subtly shaping my worldview as I grew up. Little did I know that, years later, I would have another opportunity to explore this realm beyond life, an experience that would not only confirm what I had experienced at 5, but would also dramatically expand my understanding of what exists beyond the limits of our earthly existence. The years that followed my first near-death experience were, in many ways, normal for a boy growing up in a small American town. I went to school, played with my friends, argued with my older sister, and helped my parents with household chores. But beneath this apparent normality, there was something different about me. The memory of that afternoon when I was stung by the wasp and what I experienced afterward never left me. While other memories of my childhood became hazy over time, that experience remained vivid and clear in my mind. The feeling of peace, the children playing in the dark dotted with light, the blonde girl smiling at me, all of it was etched into my memory as if it had happened yesterday. At first, I talked openly about what I had seen. I told my parents, my friends at school, anyone who would listen. The reactions were varied. My parents, although loving, clearly didn't know how to deal with my stories. They attributed it to the fertile imagination of a child or some sort of dream caused by the trauma of the near-death experience. My friends reacted with a mix of fascination and skepticism. Some thought it was cool, like it was an adventure story I had invented. Others mocked me, calling me a liar or crazy. Over time, I learned to keep this experience to myself, not because I doubted it, but because I realized that the people around me weren't ready to understand or accept what I had lived through. As I grew older, I began to seek out information about experiences similar to mine. I read books on near-death experiences, watched documentaries, and when the internet became more accessible, I spent hours researching online. I discovered that I wasn't alone, that many other people had gone through similar experiences. This brought me great comfort. At the same time, my experience left me with a unique perspective on life and death. While my schoolmates feared death or avoided thinking about it, I saw it differently. The memory of that feeling of peace and unconditional love that I experienced made me want to spread more kindness in the world. I also became more reflective, often lost in thoughts about the meaning of life and what might exist beyond it. My parents noticed these changes in me. Although they never truly understood or fully accepted my experience, they respected the person I was becoming. My mother used to say that I had an old soul, as if I had wisdom beyond my years. As I approached adolescence, I began to question my experience more. Was it real or just a product of my imagination? If it was real, What did it mean for my life and the world in general? These questions stayed with me in the following years, shaping my worldview and my search for understanding. Despite all these internal reflections, outwardly I led a pretty normal life. I had friends, played sports, and got involved in school activities. But there was always a part of me that felt different, as if I carried a secret that set me apart from others. When I turned 17, I was about to graduate from high school. I had plans for college and dreams for the future. The memory of my near-death experience at 5 was still with me, but it had become a familiar part of my personal story, something I had learned to integrate into my everyday life. Little did I know that I was about to have another experience that would not only confirm the first but expand it in ways I could never have imagined. An experience that would forever change the way I saw the world and my place in it. I was 17, just days away from prom. When everything changed again, it started with a sharp pain in my stomach. At first, I thought it was just a passing discomfort, maybe something I had eaten. But as the hours went by, the pain only worsened. High fever joined the abdominal pain, and I felt increasingly worse. My father, always practical, tried to treat me with home remedies, but nothing seemed to work. The pain kept intensifying, and I could barely move. Finally, when it became clear that this wasn't something that would pass on its own, my parents took me to the hospital. There, after a series of tests, the doctors diagnosed acute appendicitis. The problem was that it was already very advanced. My appendix was about to rupture, and I needed emergency surgery. Everything happened very quickly after that. I was prepped for surgery and taken to the operating room. I remember lying on the stretcher, looking up at the bright ceiling lights as I was being anesthetized. My last conscious thought was of fear, not of the surgery itself, but of what I might experience if something went wrong. And something did go wrong. My appendix ruptured before I reached the operating table, and once again I felt my body shutting down. But this time, the experience was very different from the first. As soon as my heart stopped during surgery, I was enveloped by a white light so bright it should have hurt. But it didn't. It was a welcoming light, almost alive, that seemed to embrace and comfort me. I felt myself being pulled toward this light, as if I were in a tunnel. As I passed through this tunnel of light, I heard soft, comforting voices around me. These voices were familiar, though I couldn't immediately identify them. Then I realized they were the same voices I had heard during my first experience at 5 years old. As I advanced, the colors around me shifted to soft, comforting pastels. The environment around me began to take shape, and I found myself in a place that seemed both strange and familiar. It was like a park or a garden, but more alive and vibrant than anything I had ever seen on Earth. In this place, I saw people talking and laughing. They seemed happy and at peace, as if they had no worries. Some of them looked familiar, though I couldn't identify them immediately. Then a woman approached me. She had a familiar face, even though I had never seen her in life. She introduced herself as Margaret Grayson, my grandmother. I had never met her. She passed away before I was born, but somehow I knew she was telling the truth. "Callum, it's so good to finally meet you," she said with a sweetness that immediately made me feel at home. We talked as if we had known each other all our lives. It was a strange but comfortable feeling. Margaret told me about the family, about things that happened before I was even born. She revealed family secrets that left me completely speechless. One of the most impactful revelations was about my brother, a brother I never knew existed, who died before I was even born. How could she know this? How could I verify this information? These questions crossed my mind, but at that moment, I simply knew she was telling the truth. Before she left, she asked me to give a message to my mother. It was something I could never have invented. She told me about a family necklace, an old piece of jewelry that had been passed down through generations and which my mother kept with great care. The description was precise: a gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant that opened to reveal an old photo. I had never seen that necklace, but at that moment, I could visualize it perfectly. Margaret told me exactly where my mother kept it and asked me to remind her of the special meaning of that jewelry. As we talked, I noticed that the environment around us was full of positive energy. There was a feeling of unconditional love permeating everything. There was no fear, no pain, no worries. It was as if all the problems and anxieties of earthly life had been left behind. I wanted to stay there. The peace and love I felt were indescribable. But, just like in my first experience, I felt it wasn't my time to stay. Margaret smiled gently and said, "You still have much to do, Callum. Your journey on Earth isn't over." Suddenly, I felt a force pulling me back. It was like I was being sucked through a reverse tunnel. The pastel colors and bright light began to fade, and I heard distant voices growing louder. I opened my eyes and found myself back in the hospital recovery room. I was surrounded by doctors and nurses who could hardly believe I had come back. I heard someone say, "It's a miracle." His heart stopped for several minutes. I felt disoriented and confused. The transition from the peace and love I had experienced to the reality of the hospital was abrupt and unsettling. But at the same time, I knew I had been through something extraordinary, something that would change my life forever. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I spent a lot of time in the hospital recovering, not just from the surgery but also from the shock of having been so close to death. During that time, I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother and the message she gave me. When I finally returned home, I sat down with my mother and told her about what had happened. At first, she was skeptical, as expected, but when I mentioned the necklace and the story of my brother, I saw the shock in her eyes. She broke down in tears. The necklace I described was exactly where my grandmother said it would be, kept in a box that my mother had never opened in my presence. And about my brother, it was a secret she had never told anyone, not even my father. This second near-death experience not only confirmed what I had lived through at 5 years old, but deepened my understanding of what exists beyond this life. It left me with an unshakable certainty that there is much more to our existence than what we can see or touch. In the years that followed, this experience continued to shape my life in profound ways. It changed the way I saw the world, how I related to people, and how I faced life's challenges. But above all, it left me with a mission: to share my story in the hope of bringing comfort and a new understanding to those who fear death or who have lost loved ones. In the days and weeks following my second near-death experience, I found myself in a state of deep reflection and transformation. Returning to everyday reality after experiencing something so extraordinary was, to say the least, challenging. The hospital, with its sounds, smells, and routines, felt surreal compared to the realm of peace and love I had visited. The worries and anxieties of daily life seemed trivial in the face of the vastness and beauty of what I had experienced. I felt like a foreigner in my own world, trying to reconcile two very different realities. The doctors and nurses who cared for me were intrigued by my calmness and serenity, especially considering the severity of my condition. They didn't understand that, for me, the fear of death had been replaced by a deeper understanding of the continuity of life. When I told the doctors about my experience, I received mixed reactions. Some showed genuine interest, asking questions and taking notes. Others clearly didn't know how to react, changing the subject or attributing everything to hallucinations caused by the anesthesia or lack of oxygen to the brain. My family, especially my parents, struggled to understand what I had gone through. They were, of course, immensely relieved that I had survived, but my accounts of meeting my deceased grandmother and learning family secrets visibly made them uncomfortable. It was particularly difficult for my mother. When I mentioned the necklace and the brother I never knew, I saw the shock and pain in her eyes. She confirmed the existence of the necklace and, with tears in her eyes, spoke about the baby she lost before I was born, a secret she had carried for years. This confirmation was both a validation of my experience and a moment of healing for my mother, who was finally able to share that hidden pain. My friends reacted in different ways. Some were fascinated, bombarding me with questions about what it was like on the other side. Others seemed scared, as if talking about death was taboo. And there were those who simply didn't believe, suggesting that I had made it all up for attention. As I recovered physically, I realized that I was undergoing a deep internal transformation. My values and priorities were changing. Things that had once seemed important, like popularity at school or wearing the latest fashion, now seemed insignificant. Instead, I found myself more concerned with existential and spiritual matters. I began reading voraciously about near-death experiences, philosophy, and spirituality. I was seeking to better understand what had happened to me and how it fit into the bigger picture of life. I spent hours on the internet, searching for others who had gone through similar experiences. One of the hardest things to deal with was the feeling of loneliness. Despite the support of my family and friends, I felt that no one truly understood what I had been through. How could I explain to someone the feeling of unconditional love I had experienced? How could I describe the peace and serenity of that other realm? At the same time, I felt compelled to share my story. I felt that I had been given a glimpse of something greater and that I had a responsibility to share this perspective with others. But I didn't know how to do it without seeming crazy or being ridiculed. Another significant change was my attitude toward death. The fear that many people feel when thinking about death had disappeared. It's not that I wanted to die. I still had so much I wanted to do and experience in this life. But the idea of death no longer scared me. I now saw it as a transition, not an end. This new perspective profoundly affected my relationships. I became more compassionate, more patient with the faults of others. After all, having experienced that unconditional love, how could I judge anyone harshly? At the same time, some friendships became more distant because I could no longer relate to concerns that now seemed superficial to me. In the months that followed, as I prepared to start college, I found myself at a crossroads. On the one hand, there was the path I had always imagined for myself. College, career at Wambran, the normal life that society expects. On the other, there was a calling to delve deeper into what I had experienced, to seek answers to life's big questions. I knew that my life would never be the same. The near-death experience wasn't just an isolated event, but the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth. A journey that would continue to shape my life in the years to come, in ways I could barely imagine. In the months and years that followed my second near-death experience, I found myself in an unrelenting search for understanding and validation. It wasn't enough to simply accept what had happened. I needed to understand it, contextualize it, and in some way, prove to myself and others that my experience was real. I began devouring books on the subject. I read works by Raymond Moody, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and other prominent researchers in the field of near-death experiences. Every book I read seemed to confirm aspects of my own experience, which was both comforting and intriguing. I discovered that many elements of my experience, the tunnel of light, the encounter with deceased loved ones, the feeling of peace and unconditional love, were common in near-death experience accounts around the world. This made me question, how could people from different cultures and religions have such similar experiences if it was all just a hallucination? My quest for knowledge wasn't limited to books. I spent countless hours online, participating in discussion forums and support groups for people who had near-death experiences. In these spaces, I found a community of people who understood what I had gone through. For the first time since my experience, I didn't feel alone. I reached out to the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, and began attending their conferences. Hearing the accounts of others and the research of scientists and doctors helped me contextualize my own experience within a larger framework of understanding. One of the most fascinating aspects of my search was exploring the scientific implications of near-death experiences. I learned about studies investigating consciousness during cardiac arrest, research on the nature of consciousness, and theories about the possibility of the mind existing independently of the brain. At the same time, I faced skepticism and disbelief from many people around me. Some friends and family thought I was obsessed, that I needed to move on and forget what had happened. Others suggested I seek psychological help, fearing that my experience might be a sign of some mental issue. These reactions hurt, but they also motivated me to seek more evidence and understanding. I began meticulously documenting every detail of my experience, comparing them with accounts from others and existing research. I wanted to be sure that I wasn't making anything up or exaggerating, that every aspect of my experience was genuine and meaningful. One of the most challenging parts of my search for validation was dealing with conventional scientific explanations for near-death experiences. Doctors and scientists often attributed these experiences to hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain or the release of chemicals during the extreme stress of impending death. While I respected science and understood the need for rational explanations, I felt that these theories couldn't capture the depth and transformative impact of my experience. How could a mere hallucination provide information I had no way of knowing, like the details about my mother's necklace or the brother I never knew? As I delved deeper into my search, I began to realize that perhaps the validation I was seeking wouldn't come from external sources. The true validation lay in the impact the experience had on my life, the positive changes it sparked in me, and how it affected my worldview and relationships. I realized that, regardless of what others thought or how science explained it, my experience was real to me. It had fundamentally changed who I was and how I lived my life. This realization brought me a peace I hadn't felt since waking up in that hospital recovery room. However, my search for understanding did not end. On the contrary, it transformed. Instead of seeking external proof or validation, I began to focus on how I could use my experience to grow as a person and help others. I started to consider ways to share my story that could bring comfort and hope to those who feared death or were mourning the loss of loved ones. This shift in focus was liberating. Instead of feeling frustrated with those who didn't believe me or didn't understand my experience, I began to see every conversation as an opportunity to share a different perspective on life and death. I started giving talks to small groups, sharing my story in local churches, support groups, and even in a few psychology classes at the local college. Each time I told my story, I felt I was honoring the experience and helping others see death as less frightening. Nevertheless, this journey for understanding and validation was not without challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I was simply deluding myself. But whenever these doubts arose, I reminded myself of the vividness of my experience, the peace and love I felt, and the accuracy of the information I had received about my family. One of the most important lessons I learned during this search was the importance of keeping an open mind. I realized that just as I wanted others to be receptive to my experience, I also needed to be open to different viewpoints and explanations. This openness led me to explore not only the science behind near-death experiences, but also the spiritual and philosophical traditions of various cultures. I discovered that many ancient traditions had descriptions of experiences similar to near-death experiences, which made me think about the universality of these encounters. As my quest for understanding evolved, I realized that perhaps the true purpose of my experience was not to find definitive answers, but to inspire questions. Questions about the nature of consciousness, what happens after death, and the purpose of life. These questions, though not always having clear answers, became the fuel for ongoing personal growth. They inspired me to live a more conscious, compassionate life, more connected to others and the world around me. Looking back, I see that my search for understanding and validation was, in itself, a transformative journey. It took me to places I never imagined, introduced me to incredible people, and expanded my worldview in ways I couldn't have predicted. And while I still don't have all the answers, I feel I have a deeper understanding, not just of my experience but of life in general. An understanding that continues to grow and surprise me, even years after that fateful night in the hospital. My near-death experience not only altered my perspective on life and death, but also profoundly transformed my relationships and the way I interacted with the world around me. One of the most significant changes was in my concept of time. Before, I lived very focused on the future, always planning the next step, the next achievement. After my experience, I came to value the present much more. Each moment became precious. an opportunity to live fully and express love and gratitude. This new perspective directly affected my relationships. For example, with my family, I became more open and expressive. The small arguments and misunderstandings that once seemed so important were now seen in a new light. I began to practice more patience and understanding, always reminding myself of the unconditional love I experienced during my near-death experience. With my parents, in particular, I developed a deeper connection. Although they still had difficulty fully understanding my experience, my new attitude touched them. I started spending more time with them, listening to their stories, and appreciating their presence in a way I had never done before. My relationship with my sister also changed significantly. Our childhood fights and teenage rivalries now seemed so insignificant. I began to see her not just as my sister, but as a soul on her own journey. This brought us closer in ways I never imagined possible. As for friendships, some deepened while others naturally drifted apart. I lost contact with some longtime friends, which was sometimes painful. But I also made new friends, often with people who had gone through similar experiences or who were on their own spiritual journeys. My view on work and career also underwent a significant transformation. Before my experience, I was focused on following a traditional path: college, a good job, financial success. Now, these things seemed less important. I began to ask myself how I could use my talents and abilities to make a positive difference in the world. This led me to rethink my career plans. Instead of seeking a job solely for the salary or status, I began looking for opportunities that would allow me to help others and do meaningful work. Eventually, this led me to consider careers in counseling, social work, and even research into near-death experiences. Another significant change was in my connection with nature. After my experience, I felt a deep reverence for the natural world. Walks in the forest, watching the sunset, or simply feeling the grass beneath my feet became almost sacred experiences. I felt as if I could perceive the interconnectedness of all things in a way I had never noticed before. My attitude toward spirituality and religion also changed dramatically. Before, I had been quite skeptical about spiritual matters. After my experience, I became more open to different beliefs and spiritual practices. I began exploring various religious and philosophical traditions, not necessarily to adopt a specific belief, but to expand my understanding of the human experience and the search for meaning. However, this new spiritual perspective sometimes created tensions, especially with people who held more rigid or dogmatic views about religion. I learned to navigate these conversations carefully, respecting others' beliefs while remaining true to my own experience. One of the most profound changes was my attitude toward death. The fear of death, which is so common in our society, had almost completely disappeared. This didn't mean that I wanted to die. On the contrary, my experience made me appreciate life even more. But the idea of death no longer frightened me. I saw it as a transition, not an end. This new perspective on death deeply affected how I dealt with loss and grief. When I lost my grandfather a few years after my experience, the pain of the loss was still there, but it was tempered by a deeper understanding. I was able to comfort my family in a way that wouldn't have been possible before. Overall, my near-death experience left me with a lasting sense of purpose and connection. I came to see every interaction, every relationship, every moment as an opportunity to grow, learn, and spread love. This new worldview didn't always make life easier. In fact, sometimes it made things more complicated, but it certainly made life richer and more meaningful. As the years passed, these changes solidified, becoming an integral part of who I was. My near-death experience was no longer just an extraordinary event that had happened to me, but a lens through which I saw and interacted with the world. A lens that continued to shape my life in profound and unexpected ways. In the years following my near-death experience, I faced a series of unique challenges but also discovered unexpected opportunities for growth and self-discovery. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with the skepticism and disbelief of those around me. Many friends and family members, though well-intentioned, struggled to accept or understand my experience. Some suggested that I had imagined everything, while others thought I was exaggerating or seeking attention. These reactions were painful and, at times, made me question my own sanity. Dealing with this skepticism required patience and understanding on my part. I learned not to force my story on anyone, but also not to deny or downplay my experience to please others. Finding this balance was a continuous learning process. Another significant challenge was integrating my experience into everyday life. After experiencing a realm of peace and unconditional love, the normal world often seemed harsh and challenging in comparison. Mundane tasks and daily concerns sometimes felt trivial or meaningless in light of what I had experienced. I had to learn how to balance my new spiritual perspective with the practical demands of life. This meant finding ways to bring the peace and love I had experienced into my daily life, even in stressful or unpleasant situations. It wasn't easy, but over time, I was able to better integrate my experience into my everyday life. An unexpected challenge came in the form of others' expectations. Some people, upon learning about my experience, expected me to have all the answers about life after death or to be some kind of spiritual guru. I had to learn to be honest about what I knew and what I didn't, and to admit that, despite my extraordinary experience, I was still learning and growing like everyone else. However, along with these challenges came incredible opportunities. My experience opened doors I never imagined possible. I was invited to speak at conferences on near-death experiences, participated in research studies, and even collaborated with scientists interested in investigating the phenomenon. These opportunities allowed me to meet fascinating people from around the world, other near-death experience survivors, researchers, philosophers, and spiritual seekers. These connections greatly expanded my understanding and helped me contextualize my own experience in new and interesting ways. Another opportunity that arose was the chance to help others. I discovered that my story could bring comfort to those who were dealing with the fear of death or grieving the loss of loved ones. I began volunteering at hospitals and hospice centers, sharing my experience with terminally ill patients and their families. This work was incredibly rewarding. Seeing the relief in the eyes of someone struggling with the fear of death, or the comfort my story brought to someone in mourning, made me feel that my experience had a greater purpose. A particularly significant opportunity came when I was invited to participate in a long-term study on the effects of near-death experiences on people's lives. This study not only allowed me to contribute to the scientific understanding of the phenomenon, but also gave me the chance to reflect deeply on how my experience continued to affect me over the years. Throughout this process, I discovered that I had a talent for writing. I began documenting my journey in a blog, which eventually turned into a book. Writing became a therapeutic way to process my experience and its ongoing implications in my life. One of the most gratifying aspects of this journey was seeing how my experience inspired others to explore their own beliefs and perceptions about life and death. I received countless messages from people who, after hearing my story, began questioning their assumptions and opening up to new possibilities. However, with these opportunities came responsibilities. I felt a strong sense of duty to share my story honestly and ethically. This meant being careful not to exaggerate or romanticize my experience and always making it clear that I was sharing my personal perspective, not proclaiming universal truths. As the years passed, the challenges and opportunities continued to shape my journey in unexpected ways. Each obstacle overcome seemed to open new doors, and each new opportunity brought with it new lessons. Looking back, I see that these challenges and opportunities were crucial to my personal and spiritual growth. They taught me to be more resilient, more compassionate, and more open to the infinite possibilities of life. My near-death experience was only the beginning. The years that followed, with all their ups and downs, were a continuation of that extraordinary journey. A journey that continues to this day, surprising, challenging, and inspiring me every step of the way. As the years passed since my near-death experience, my reflections on life and death became increasingly profound and nuanced. What began as an intense personal experience evolved into a philosophy of life that continues to develop and surprise me. One of the most significant reflections that emerged was about the nature of consciousness. My experience made me question whether consciousness is truly limited to the physical brain. The fact that I had vivid, coherent experiences while my brain was clinically inactive led me to consider the possibility that consciousness might exist beyond the boundaries of the physical body. This idea had profound implications for my understanding of life and death. If consciousness can exist independently of the body, then perhaps death is not the end of existence, but rather a transition to another state of being. This perspective brought great comfort, not only to me, but also to many people with whom I shared my story. Another important reflection was about the purpose of life. Before my experience, I viewed life in a fairly linear way: birth, growth, work, family, aging, and death. But my journey beyond life made me realize that perhaps there is a greater purpose to our existence. The sense of unconditional love and universal connection I experienced led me to believe that perhaps we are here to learn, grow, and above all, love. Every challenge, every relationship, every experience, good or bad, came to be seen as an opportunity for personal and spiritual evolution. This perspective radically changed how I approached problems and challenges in life. Instead of feeling victimized by difficult circumstances, I began to see them as opportunities for growth. This doesn't mean that life became easy, or that I never felt frustrated or sad again, but my overall attitude toward difficulties changed significantly. A particularly impactful reflection was about the nature of time. During my experience, time seemed to behave differently. Moments seemed to stretch indefinitely, while long periods passed in an instant. This made me question whether time, as we experience it in everyday life, is really a universal constant or just a construct of our limited perception. This reflection on time led me to value the present moment much more. I realized that we often spend much of our lives trapped in the past or anxious about the future, missing the richness of the present moment. I began consciously practicing mindfulness, trying to be fully present in every moment of my life. Another area of deep reflection was on the interconnectedness of all things. During my experience, I felt a unity with everything that exists, a sense that everything in the universe is fundamentally connected. This perception transformed my view of the world and my relationships with others and nature. I began to see each person as part of this cosmic web of connections, each with their own path and purpose. This deepened my empathy and compassion, even for those with whom I disagreed or who challenged me. After all, if we are all part of a greater whole, how can we truly be separate or enemies? This idea of interconnectedness also profoundly affected my relationship with the environment. I came to see the Earth not just as our home but as a living organism of which we are an integral part. This led me to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle and become more actively involved in environmental causes. My reflections on death also evolved significantly. Although my fear of death had largely disappeared, I began to see death not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as a natural and necessary part of the cycle of life. I came to believe that death, like life, has a purpose in the grand scheme of things. This does not mean that I began to view death romantically or stopped feeling sadness over the loss of loved ones, but my perspective on death became more balanced and peaceful. I started to see death not as the end, but as a transition, a passage to another state of being. A particularly powerful reflection was on the power of love. The unconditional love I experienced during my journey beyond life became a kind of moral compass for me. I began to see love not just as an emotion, but as a fundamental force of the universe, perhaps even the very fabric of reality. This led me to prioritize love in all its forms: romantic love, familial love, love for friends, love for humanity, and for all living beings. I came to believe that, in the end, what truly matters is not our achievements or possessions, but the amount of love we give and receive during our earthly journey. These reflections continue to evolve as I age and gain new experiences. Every new challenge, every new joy, every new loss adds another layer of understanding to my philosophy of life and death. I now realize that my near-death experience was not an isolated event that happened years ago, but the beginning of a continuous journey of discovery and growth. A journey that, I hope, will continue not only throughout my life but perhaps even beyond it. As the years have passed since my near-death experience, I've begun to reflect on the legacy it has left in my life and in the lives of those around me. I realize that the impact of this experience extended far beyond myself, creating ripples that continue to expand in ways I could never have predicted. One of the most significant aspects of this legacy is how it changed my approach to everyday life. Each day became a precious opportunity to grow, love, and make a difference. Things that once seemed trivial, a stranger's smile, a bird's song, a hug from a loved one, took on new meaning and depth. This shift in perspective profoundly affected my relationships. My family and friends noticed a marked difference in me. I became more patient, more understanding, and more expressive in my love for them. Conflicts that once seemed important were now seen in a new light, and I became more adept at resolving them with compassion and empathy. Another important aspect of the legacy of my experience was the impact it had on my career and life choices. I decided to dedicate a significant portion of my time and energy to sharing my story and helping others who were struggling with questions related to life, death, and the meaning of existence. I began giving talks at hospitals, hospice centers, and grief support groups. I saw firsthand how my story could bring comfort and hope to people who were facing death, whether their own or that of a loved one. The fear in a terminal patient's eyes transforming into peace, or the relief on the face of someone grieving as they heard about my experience, became some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. My experience also led me to become more actively involved in research on near-death experiences. I collaborated with scientists and researchers, participating in studies and sharing my story at academic conferences. I felt a responsibility to contribute to a greater understanding of this fascinating and potentially transformative phenomenon. An unexpected aspect of the legacy of my experience was how it inspired others to explore their own beliefs and spiritual experiences. Over the years, many people have reached out to share their own stories of extraordinary experiences, things they had never felt comfortable sharing before. I realized that by speaking openly about my experience, I had somehow given others permission to explore and express their own spiritual journeys. The book I wrote about my experience became an important part of this legacy. I received countless messages from readers around the world, telling me how my story had helped them during difficult times or inspired them to live their lives more fully and meaningfully. Knowing that my experience was having a positive impact on the lives of people I would never meet in person was deeply gratifying. Another aspect of the legacy of my experience was how it changed my relationship with spirituality and religion. While I did not adopt any specific religion, I developed a deep respect for various spiritual traditions. I came to see different religious beliefs not as mutually exclusive, but as different paths to the same fundamental truth. This perspective allowed me to connect with people from diverse backgrounds and beliefs in a way that would not have been possible before. The way I came to view death also became part of the legacy of my experience. My piece regarding death often brought comfort to friends and family who were facing their own mortality or dealing with the loss of loved ones. I realized that my experience had given me a kind of gift, the ability to talk about death in a way that eased fear and brought hope. One of the most profound aspects of the legacy of my experience was how it changed my understanding of the purpose of life. I came to see our earthly existence not as an end in itself, but as part of a greater journey. Every challenge, every joy, every relationship became an opportunity for growth and learning. This perspective gave me a resilience and inner peace that sustained me through difficult times. As I grow older, I continue to discover new facets of the legacy of my near-death experience. It has become a guiding thread in my life, a constant source of inspiration and guidance. But perhaps the most important aspect of this legacy is how it constantly reminds me of what is truly important in life: love, compassion, growth, and connection. Looking back, I see that my near-death experience was not just an extraordinary event that happened to me years ago. It was the beginning of a journey that continues to this day. a journey of self-discovery, of connection with others, and with something greater than ourselves. It is a journey that I hope will continue to inspire and transform not only my own life, but also the lives of those around me, long after I have left this world. In the end, I realize that the true legacy of my experience is not just what happened to me on that day in the hospital, but what I have chosen to do with that experience since then. It is how it has transformed me and how I have used that transformation to try to make a positive difference in the world. And it is a legacy that, I hope, will continue to grow and expand far beyond my own lifetime. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. See you next time.